I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Environment. This is a regular television show where we bring guests that help all of us understand our environment in the state of Wisconsin, in the Midwest, in our country, and I think we're linked to the rest of the world. So we want to have experts come here and help us understand what's going on and understand whether or not we want to do something about it. I'm delighted that today's guest, Pat Durkin, is an expert on a number of things in the out of doors. He writes for many newspapers, some magazines, and he's been a writer for most of his professional life. But he's also a scholar, and if I could pick one area that he's recognized, I'm sure throughout the country, it's deer. And we've got that time of the year right now. So Pat Durkin, let's go at it.
You bet. Thanks, George.
Well, what is the situation? Our deer season is already ongoing for the bow people and the crossbow people, and the gun season is coming up shortly. And if I'm correct, we have longer deer seasons than I remember as a youngster.
Oh, definitely. We've always had long archery seasons, but these days I think our archery season opens around always somewhere between the 13th and 15th, 16th of September. It goes all the way into early January now, so basically it's almost 4 straight months and doesn't shut down at all. Doesn't shut down for gun season. If you want to hunt with a bow during gun season, you can now. And our gun season, we have still the 9-day gun season. We also have a muzzleloading season now in the first, I think it's the first 10 days of December. We typically, in many counties now, have a late season holiday time period, antlerless only gun season. And so, in many ways, it's become like, I remember as a kid, you kind of broke your season into small game for a while, then a couple days of deer hunting, some days of bow hunting, and then late in the season you go rabbit hunting again. And now it's, if you really want to, you can hunt deer pretty much right through from almost Labor Day through the early January. So it's definitely gotten longer.
Now we have, in certain parts of the state, lots of deer, maybe too many deer. You live in Waupaca County, which is the most deer-populated county in the state. But our deer herd isn't the same as back 20 years ago when people went up north to Forest County to hunt deer. Now the deer seem to be mostly south of Highway 64.
Yeah, the big population is definitely in the southern two-thirds of Wisconsin. And I always find it fascinating how we tend to act like deer are just some creature that just magically reproduces itself and doesn't really concern itself with how it goes about doing it. But the only reason we have fewer deer in the northern forest now than some people like is because the habitat up there has gotten older. We aren't doing the logging and all the kind of forestry practices that used to generate the young growth of timber that deer prefer and that grouse prefer. So as a result, they've in the meantime though, down in this part of the state and elsewhere, the habitat for deer is still pretty good. We have lots of woodlands. We have lots in the farming in the winter. We still have enough crops and stuff out in the field where they can make a living there, and they're doing really well. Plus we don't have the severe winters we used to have. So I think if we had the habitat up north that we could have for deer, the population up north would be booming, but I just don't think right now on a wide-scale basis that the northern forest is at that stage where it really favors deer as much as it does in the southern two-thirds of the state.
We actually have too many deer for a healthy herd.
Definitely.
Where I live and probably where you live, and there have been some changes in terms of how we handle that, and there have been some problems that have come with concentration of deer.
Yeah, we have seen now, one thing that's fascinating about the changes in our landscape is we still have suitable habitat for deer in farm country. But in Waupaca County, we've even had some cases though in a not in a real harsh winter, but a tough winter. We've seen some winter loss in farm country now. When the DNR put some radio collars and followed deer around like up in that Shawano area, which is farm country, they followed them around and started tracking how are deer dying. And of course, a lot of people always want to blame predators, but they found in the Shawano County study area was that the leading cause, other than hunters, was winter starvation. So here you're losing deer even in farm country in some winters. So that tells us then that maybe even in farm country the deer have eaten away too much of the understory to pull themselves through winter, without struggle. So I think given that, I have to believe that they are definitely stressing the habitat even in central Wisconsin now.
Well, and of course, as usual, we humans have to fix things. And so we've tried feeding, baiting, feeding hay and corn to northern Wisconsin deer where there isn't any corn being raised, and then expecting their stomachs to adjust to our menu. And so many of those deer just can't adjust to winter.
Yeah.
And we're killing them with kindness. We are mismanaging the deer, I fear, and of course many people think they can stockpile the deer. They think it's healthy to have 35 deer on their 40 or 80 acres, and of course that doesn't work either, does it?
Yeah, it's really, to me, it's fascinating how illogical some of the solutions people come up with. And these aren't, in my experience, a lot of times these aren't dumb people who make the suggestion. Like I remember a guy I know pretty well, when he was finding dead deer on his property around not too far from where I live, he was saying, well, we got to get more deer out there. I said, well, how is getting more deer out there going to solve something like starvation? You wouldn't do that with people. You want to pack more people in their room if you're out of food. So why would you think you can stockpile stockpile this problem with deer and solve it through abundance? It just creates an even worse problem down the road. So I'm not sure why that disconnect is there, but I guess I liken the way the places deer live like for us. How long would we last in the Wisconsin winter with our roof over our head? And likewise, for the deer, how long can they live out in the landscape if they don't have quick access to food and decent shelter? They aren't going to last either. So it comes back. It always comes back in all these issues we talk about with wildlife. It'll always come back to habitat. And I think from the work you've done over the years in conservation, in wetland conservation, and woodland conservation, you understand that. And I wish more people could have that direct experience, George, with the land, to see how the land gives and takes with wildlife.
100-year-old tree doesn't feed anything.
Right.
We need fresh, new growth, and it makes a big difference in the wildlife. We're going to have to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the things that man can do to improve the situation and some of the threats of our deer herd in the state of Wisconsin.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Environment. I'm George Curtis, and I'm talking to Pat Durkin. Whose deer are they?
There are deer. The public. One of the great things about America, and here in the United States, and it's same is true in Canada, is that the deer belong to the public. All natural resources belong to the public, whether it's water, of course, the air, but then of course the big challenge in our country is that when you have all these public resources, who takes care of them? And you don't want to get in a situation like you hear the expression, the tragedy of the commons, where we have all these great resources, but we don't really have anybody taking care of them. So they start falling apart, they start breaking down, and before long we have a mess again. So I think it's always our challenge to take ownership in these resources and do our best to manage them for ourselves and the future.
Well, very nice guy, Ben Hughes, farmer across the road from me, is trying to make a living selling cheap milk. And he has quite a few cows. I could only guess he has in excess of 100. And so he tries to get 3, 4, 5 cuttings of his alfalfa so he doesn't have to buy feed and can keep his farm. And I'm sure the 35 to 50 deer that feed on his alfalfa without paying a dime to him are a real problem.
Right. And I remember we sound like a couple of old codgers here talking about this stuff, but I remember back in the 80s, it wasn't as hard to get hunters to come out and shoot extra deer. And it's getting more difficult to do that now. You look at the data DNR compiles on who shoots deer in Wisconsin. They can, with all the great computers we have now and the way of tracking hunters, they can pretty much know every hunter in the state and what his patterns are as far as how many deer he kills every year. And the typical deer hunter in Wisconsin doesn't want more than 1 deer a year. And so even when you have all these opportunities, there's very few hunters who actually shoot more than 1 deer a year. And so how do you push that pressure, hunting pressure around to take the pressure off that kind of land? It's not easy.
Well, and there are people who love to hunt deer that don't want their deer, period, because of concerns. The primary concern, CWD. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, we've had CWD now, where we documented it for the first time, and it was from deer shot during the 2001 hunting season. And initially, there was a big effort made to, stamp it out. Unfortunately, the idea that we were going to stamp the disease out was probably unrealistic, and it caused a backlash that caused the DNR to back off so much that the population started growing again. The deer population started growing, and now you have a situation down southwestern Wisconsin. There's many areas down there now, and I think it's like in north central Iowa County, parts of there's about 3 or 4 areas down there, townships now, where they have the buck population. Any buck 2.5, 3.5 and older, about half of them now carry CWD, chronic wasting disease, and it's a disease that's always fatal. There's no curing it. There's no getting over it. Some deer don't survive. No deer survives it. It kills them. And now that disease is going pretty good numbers now in Richland County. We just saw it pop up on 2 game farms up in one not too far from me in Waupaca County, another one up in Shawano County. And so as you look around, this disease is slowly but surely spreading. And where it spreads, it's definitely getting more compressed. Not compressed, but the density is increasing. The more deer in that area there are, the more prevalent the disease is in that herd. And so we're facing, I think, a real challenge here coming at us in slow motion, but it's nonetheless coming at us.
Well, it's frightening, and it's frightening to many, many people, and it should be. And of course, the issue, do game farms contribute to it because of the concentration of deer? Do people who bait, have their pile of corn or apples or whatever happen to be, get a concentration of deer on their bait pile? Do people who feed deer and unnaturally throughout the year, do they contribute to a concentration of deer? Of course, those people are doing that for a tactical advantage, so they can get the deer to their private property off the public land, so the poor guy or gal who out the public land is looking for old tracks. But what's your answer to that?
Yeah, well, it's hard to say for certain how the disease spreads or how it got here initially, but it's definitely here and it's definitely spreading. What's frustrating right now, I think, when you're watching this go on, is that the DNR right now does not seem to have a real answer as far as how it's going to attack CWD in the new areas it pops up. Now, we have it right in our CWD response plan. The state's response plan says in no uncertain terms that when it pops up in a new area, the DNR is supposed to go in there, conduct a good sampling in that area, which means shooting enough deer to get a good scientific sample to make sure we understand the prevalence in that area. Well, we aren't doing that. We're still relying on we're waiting until hunting season and then hoping that enough hunters turn in samples to give us a read on it, but there's no effort being made that way. And the one thing I've harped on a few times, and I really think it's something that comes down to a lack of leadership, a lack of determination by our state government, our state leaders. I always, every time I see Scott Walker, our governor, make a pitch to go deer hunting, tell people to go out and enjoy deer hunting, I wish he would then do a public service ad saying, and I also encourage you people to bring your deer in and get tested. We need to know where this disease is. We need to know its prevalence rates. There's a lot of science here we got to unpack and figure out. But you don't see that kind of leadership. And I think that's going to really make the situation worse and worse and worse the longer we quit, the longer we keep ignoring it.
It was my impression that the state government kind of wanted to pretend that CWD wasn't a problem, wasn't a threat, wasn't spreading, and now it has spread so that CWD is showing up in many of the counties that are a long way away from Dane County where it started.
Yeah, right now, the main area, the worst areas, are still that first area they discovered it around Mount Horeb, Iowa County, Dane County, Sauk County, into Richland County, and it is like watching basically a blood pool spreading real slowly outward. And but then you go along the Wisconsin River corridor and you see it popping up in Juneau County and Adams County. It's up in Wapaka County now, Shawano on a game farm. Up in Vilas County, Oneida County, there's a game farm up there with CWD. And I don't pretend to act like we know it's all the game farms doing, but those are areas we know it is. And so the thing that worries me there is that you have these game farms with some cases, and they know when this first started happening, the response was, if we know of a game farm with CWD on it, we have to wipe them out at some point here, and the quicker the better to stamp it out. And the longer you let that population though stay in the ground, the longer you risk that disease getting worse. And the worse it gets, you have more deer out there sloughing off the prions that cause CWD, and those prions don't die; they're not alive. So there's no way of dying. You don't burn them off through cooking. So that stuff's going to remain in the soil and build up that contamination pool, basically. And so you think these are issues that the state just keeps ignoring, and I think it's going to be at our peril. I think we're going to pay a big price for it eventually.
I agree. We're going to have to take our second break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about something more fun. We're going to use Pat Durkin's expertise to make suggestions to people as to how they can, in the state of Wisconsin, have a very pleasurable deer hunting experience this fall.
Right, thank you.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Environment. Pat Durkin and I are talking about deer and deer hunting. I've been raised in this state. I've been around longer than I'm going to admit. Come from a family that hunts, relatives that hunt, friends that hunt, kids that hunt, and I've always thought that there were 4 holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and deer season.
Yeah.
But deer season has been a holiday in the state of Wisconsin as long as I can remember. How about you?
Yeah, it was never, I grew up in Madison, and schools didn't shut down for deer season, but it was very easy to get time off to deer hunt. Basically all you had to do was ask your dad or ask your mom, and they understood that this is an important part of Wisconsin's culture. And my dad had quit deer hunting by the time I came along as a teenager. But anytime I wanted to go deer hunting during the gun deer season, I had the car and I could go. And I remember too, one of my how I got into deer hunting, the gun season, I could take care of myself bow hunting. I just ride my bicycle somewhere near Madison and go bow hunting. But to go gun hunting was a little trickier. But I remember my dad pawned me off on 2 of his friends when I was 15 years old, and they took me up north deer hunting for opening weekend. Then Dad drove up after the weekend and picked me up on Sunday up in Vilas County and drove me home. And I think you look at those kind of things where a father would pawn his kid off on 2 of his buddies to go deer hunting and trust them and trust me not to make a fool of myself. But I think those are kind of things that help spread the deer hunting tradition in our state.
Well, whenever you go northern Wisconsin tavern, you see these pictures of the old deer camps of anywhere from 5 to 15 people, and deer hanging on poles, and these grizzled-looking, mostly men, look like they couldn't get a date in Hurley, but they probably did. There's a lot of culture, tradition, fun,
Yeah.
and camaraderie with that tradition. It's still going on, but not nearly as much.
Yeah, one of the, it's always funny how different things interact on any kind of issue. And the one that I think about quite often in the old days, when it was hard to get to northern Wisconsin, and as we talked about a little bit earlier, there was more deer up there generations ago too, when the forest was still young. But the thing that I think is always fascinating about northern Wisconsin is that in the old days, in the 40s and 50s, it was still pretty common for guys to take cars and get up there, but knowing that the trip up there is going to be hard enough, even by car, once they got there, they're in no hurry to leave. And well, now we have pretty good highways, we have more fuel efficient cars, more reliable cars, and so you can shoot back and forth in a weekend much more easily than they could a generation ago. And so you have the deer camp, instead of being a 9-day destination, has become a 2-day destination. And so right away that cuts something off there where you don't see guys planning a whole stay, and you just don't see as many camps now staying through Thanksgiving. That used to be a big part of the deer camp tradition, was that big Thanksgiving feast too, where the wives would come up and spend the day up there. And well, not many people do that anymore. That's changed.
But I bet you have some suggestions, or people who've been thinking about it, haven't done it for a little while, but miss it. Adjusting to the conditions today, there's lots of opportunity to hunt deer in the state of Wisconsin, probably equal to anywhere else in the country.
Easily. I saw a really interesting study just a little while ago. They basically look at the whitetail range in our country, and they draw a line from the border of the western border of North Dakota, where it hits Montana, and drop a straight line off of there down to the west side of Texas, and then everything east of there, and it's about 37 states in that big block. And out of all those states, I'm sure you know the answer to this, but what state has more public land available to hunting?
Our state.
Number one is Wisconsin. We have about 7 million acres available. And so to me, we have so many ways to go deer hunting. I think even in Waupaca County, which doesn't have a lot of public land, but still has enough public land to where I drive along like Highway 22 south of Waupaca. You can drive down there and see these public hunting grounds and fishing grounds along the little creeks and rivers. And seldom do you see more than 1 or 2 cars parked at those little parking lots. So we have lots of ways to go hunting if you want. And I have no problem helping people find places to hunt in Wisconsin, because I've hunted a lot of them myself. And I still find that the public lands, I've probably hunted public lands in Wisconsin as much as I have private lands. So I've been lucky that way.
We have 1 minute left. What would happen to our deer if nobody hunted them?
What would happen eventually is they get to the point where they become a pest. The disease will start taking them. And that's the one thing that I hope hunters will think about, is we often talk about if we weren't hunting deer, they would just get diseased and die. And but here we have something like chronic wasting disease going on, and our response has been to kind of just ignore it. And as hunters, we have to get involved in that issue and make sure people realize that by ignoring it, we are jeopardizing that herd that way too. So I think we have to put our money where our mouth is and start getting involved in that issue.
Thank you. Thank you for your information, for your participation. It's always great to have you on the show.
Thanks, George.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The deer of Wisconsin are a major asset, potentially a major problem. They are a major liability when we get so many of them on the highway that people are being injured in accidents. They are potentially even bigger liability if this CWD travels throughout the entire herd. They belong to the people. Even if, as a landowner, I have 30 or 50 deer that go through my property every day, they're not my deer. It is unethical for me to feed or bait these deer so that the deer come off the adjoining public property and they're on my property to be shot. What happens to these deer if we don't harvest them? Unfortunately, they die. Disease, accidents, and diseases that destroy the future of the herd. Take another look at deer hunting, game, and the wonderful resource we have in this state. Don't let it get away. I'm George Curtis. That's my opinion.